It was January of 2011 that I preached this book at a conference here at this church before I was the associate pastor here. And then this past summer, for the counselors at camp, we shared a completely different message every morning in counselor devotion from Habakkuk. And tonight, as we're considering thankfulness to God, we're going to look at it in even a different way. One preacher bragged on going so many years with never preaching from the same verses twice, and then later on in his older years, he said, how foolish was that? Like we all got it the first time or something. And the Bible's repetitive for a reason. And so anyway, in Habakkuk, we're going to look at, a lost and found department concerning thankfulness. We have a lost and found department here at the church. It consists of a wicker basket over in the fellowship hall. And the number one most popular item in it would be kids' clothes. You might find a spiral notebook where someone was taking Bible notes every now and then in it, or maybe a Bible with no one's name in it. What baffles me, though, is when I find a pair of kids' shoes in there and wondering how they left church. Did they really leave with no shoes on and really forget their shoes? Anyway, you'll find all sorts of things in there. And if we could, it might be a good idea to have a lost and found department in a spiritual sense. If Habakkuk and the people of Israel would have had a spiritual lost and found department, Habakkuk's thankfulness would have been in there, because he lost touch with thankfulness to God. And we see this by the way that this letter begins. Habakkuk is a minor prophet over the people of God in some very dark times that are going on. And Habakkuk is losing his thankfulness. In chapter 1, he is very perplexed. He is in a dark time. There is much sin in the land. He is a prophet who cares. He is grieved over the sin in the land. And we see in verse 1 that he's burdened about it. It says in verse 1, the burden which Habakkuk the prophet did see, and that's his burden. His burden is the sinfulness that is just continuing to go on. He sees the condition in the land. The prophet has been praying. He's been crying out to God. We see that in verse 2. He's already been praying, and now he says, "O Lord, how long shall I cry?" And get this, "and thou wilt not hear. Even cry unto thee of violence, and thou wilt not save." And we go on, and it's the same attitude that Habakkuk is in. He is doubting. He is called by many the doubting Thomas of the Old Testament. We just shared a message on Thomas 2 weeks ago from the New Testament, his doubting. And so Habakkuk is called the doubter of the Old Testament. He has prayed. He has cried out to God, about what's going on in the land. And things aren't improving. And he's saying that God's not hearing his prayer. And that God's not saving. He is concluding that heaven is being silent about earth's sinfulness that's going on. And he questions God. And he is calculating here that God's law, he says there, where? In verse 3, I think it is, he says God's law, verse 4, is slacked. That's a very strong word that he's using toward God and toward his law. That word means paralyze. It's God, everything is just frozen here concerning your righteousness and your law, and judgment doth not go forth. It's dormant, is what he's saying. Habakkuk is burdened by what he sees to the point that he himself is hindered in his own spiritual life. We will not find ourselves complaining and being thankful at the same time. Habakkuk is losing his thankfulness here. You know what he's doing? He's living by sight. He's living by what he sees. He sees what's going on in the land. He cannot see what God is doing. He assumes God is doing nothing because he is living by sight. He's complaining to God. He's charging God with doing nothing about it. He's looking for understanding in the circumstances that he sees. Let us be careful in living by sight. Let us be careful in just wanting to act and react and wanting revenge or wanting there to be vengeance or wanting someone to reap from what they've sown in our timing right now, and just living by sight and saying, this picture is wrong, this is not right, and something needs to happen right now about it. We better be careful about that, because God is always doing something. However, you and I can fall into the same place Habakkuk was, with being so consumed with a wrong of some sort that we start accusing God and we start blaming God. We want to be able to make sense of it all. It's safe to say this could happen to us, getting too caught up in the things going on around us. Or just the idea that the only thing that's going to satisfy us is a complete explanation for why things are happening the way they're happening. Look, we can just downright rob ourselves of thankfulness in our hearts when we allow ourselves to go there. When we live by sight, we lose our thankfulness. That's where Habakkuk was in chapter 1. Now, he is calling out to God, and that's good. And God is talking back to him, and there's some changing that's starting to take place. So Habakkuk goes from losing his thankfulness to looking for thankfulness. The truth is, God's really just molding him and helping him to get back on track. But as we look in chapter 2, we can sum this up with Habakkuk looking for thankfulness. Look in verse 1 of chapter 2. After the complaining in chapter 1, he now says, and all the talk he's doing, he now says, I will stand upon my watch and set me upon the tower, and will watch to see what he will say unto me, and what I shall answer when I am reproved. He humbles himself before God now, after the way he's lived by sight, and he's made his complaining and done all of these things. And instead of being consumed by what he sees and having many words of negativity toward God about it, and getting himself all worked up and wondering why, this is wrong, instead of that, he gets a little more quiet. And he goes and he gets alone with God. And he waits. And he's expecting an answer from God now that he has quit talking. You know, our time of prayer isn't a pressure on us to fill it up with words. We pray, we exalt God, we make our requests known unto him with thanksgiving. And then before we close in prayer, we can just sit there quiet, trusting and knowing without hearing anything audible that He's speaking to our hearts. God never delays an answer. He always has the answer. When it unfolds to us, might be in a different timing, but God always answers right there. Habakkuk is spending some quiet time alone. He was wailing away. Now he's waiting, and he's watching for God. He's discovered here, and it teaches us that living by sight is not the answer. Look here in chapter 2 and verse 4, and it says, the just shall live by his faith. So, as Habakkuk is the prophet, in his position to do what he's to do, he's found that he can't live by sight, but he must live by faith. He is told by the Lord, the just shall live by his faith. So he watches and he waits alone. Faith will never fail us. In the most difficult of times, faith will not fail. When we live by faith, sin can't win. When we live by faith, we will not be so consumed with what we see. And we'll know that there is something and someone greater at work than anything that we will see on this earth. When we live by faith, we can depend upon God and His Word. Habakkuk mentions the judgment of God, and he mentions some of the things of God, but he's not applying them properly. But he goes and he gets alone. We need a place to go get alone with God sometimes. Many times, a lot of times. And just trust Him. Trusting His Word. Depending on it. Like Habakkuk did. When Habakkuk sat upon the tower by faith, he heard from God. In verses 9 through 19 of this second chapter, you'll see woe to him several times. Woe to him. It'll be repeated. And God is letting Habakkuk know, hey, I know all about it. I know what they're, woe unto this person, they're doing this. Woe unto them, they're doing this. God knows everything. Nothing slips by God. And he says all of these woes, and we can relate all of these woes to a lot of things today, whether it be gambling or abortion or alcohol or false religion. You'll find all of those things in the woes that the Lord gives, and they're for good reason. These things that will wreck homes and families and marriages and friendships and careers. And then at the end of it all, in chapter 2 and verse 20, he says, but the Lord is in His holy temple. Let all the earth keep silence before Him. In other words, Habakkuk, I know what's going on in this world. I see what's going on around here. Quiet down, Habakkuk. Quiet down and trust in me. I'm in control in my holy temple. Do you know that that's where the Lord is and that He is in control of all things? We're going to see what we see in the dark days that we're in. And God has put some measures to take place on this earth to take care of a lot of things. You know, many things are going to hit close. And look, the very best thing, the first and very best thing that we do, many do, and that is to go get alone with God, to be led by God in what we do, to go to God in faith and believe His Word and to trust Him that He is alive, that He knows all, that He is on His throne. We resource of faith to be thankful. We're getting to thankfulness tonight. He lost his thankfulness. He's looking for thankfulness. And the pattern that we can follow as well, that we see in chapter 3, is that Habakkuk finds lasting thankfulness. Habakkuk was steered away from the consumption of the circumstances in his sight. No longer robbed God. I say it every year about the time. Thankful because not everyone is thankful. And maybe we are a thankful people, but we see what could sidetrack us from thankfulness to God. Habakkuk was sidetracked by what was happening in the world around him. But now Habakkuk finds lasting thankfulness no matter what's going on. That's what we need. You know, if we are going to look at what's going on in this world or anything that man can touch and want to have thankfulness in that, our thankfulness is going to be up and down. It's going to come and going to be unsafe. It's going to be unstable. But Habakkuk found something else that we need, and I invite you to look in chapter 3 and verses 17 through 19, where Habakkuk from the beginning letter to what he says at the end here. Look at the destitute situation and notice his reaction at the end of the reading. He says, although the fig tree shall not blossom, that's not good. Neither shall fruit be in the vine, that's not promising. The late olive shall fail, and the field shall eat. Man, we're talking about drought. We're talking about a famine in the land. The flock shall be cut off from the fold, and there shall be no herd in the stalls. Yet I will rejoice in the Lord. I will joy in the God of my salvation. The Lord God is my strength, and He will make my feet like hinds' feet, and He will make me to walk upon mine high places. Oh wow, Habakkuk started living by faith. He started trusting God. He had a basis for thankfulness in his life that could not be touched. It could not be tampered with. You know, the Bible tells us to be thankful in all things and to be thankful for all things. We are called continuous thankfulness in our lives, uninterrupted. And that's what we have no matter what's going on in life. If we are looking to the Lord and we are trusting Him. You know, if we're looking to a job, us to have a foundation of thankfulness, or maybe our health, maybe our marriage, or if there has to be for you to be thankful, that's a very unstable thankfulness. It's a very unsafe place for us to lay a foundation for thankfulness, because all of those things could turn for the worse. Habakkuk, and no matter what kind of thankfulness in his life that would last him above and beyond any circumstance that he has to go through. May we reflect on what makes us thankful tonight. What is it? What does it take for you and I to be thankful? It cannot depend upon earthly situations. I do not recommend that whatsoever, because that can change instantly. It can't have anything to do with sight, it must be about faith. We must look to God and our eternal salvation and what He has given, that we might be a thankful people. The lost and found department of thankfulness. I hope it's not lost tonight. If it is, we can get it back. God is in the business of restoring us and making us to be the thankful people that He's called us to be. And I don't know if I've ever been successful in giving enough time for testimony, but it looks like we have tonight. And so it's your turn now. It's your turn to give thankfulness to the Lord.